So I already came out with a tier list of the decks that I think will be up and coming, but this is a tier list of the best decks in the meta right now after the first day, and what I think will continue to be the best decks going forward. So the first one is Quest Warlock. This is no particular order, this is literally just like the order that it is on my deck list, okay? So don't freak out and be like, Quest Warlock's #1, but I do think it's up there as one of the top decks in the game, mostly because of the fact that it counters a lot of the stuff in the meta. It absolutely dumpsters Priest. It does pretty well versus Mage, which is seeing a surprising amount of play considering the fact that it just got nerfed. If you have a good hand and you have some decent control and you can get a Dark Skies out early, it can actually do decently well into Hunter as well. And it honestly has a pretty good matchup into a lot of different decks. Not a lot of people are playing Bomb Warrior as much because it doesn't counter Demon Hunter. You're playing against less aggro Demon Hunter, which was a bad matchup for this deck to begin with. So 2 of your bad matchups are being seen less. Some of your better matchups are being seen a lot more. And this deck is really, really popping off from my experience. I'm like 6-2 with it or something like that. Basically, what you want to do with this deck is you want to hard mulligan, always for plot twist and sense demons. If you are into an aggro deck like a Hunter or a Paladin, which could be Murloc, you want to keep Dark Skies. Dark Skies is in general a pretty good keep. But if you're playing into something like a Priest or something you know won't be very aggressive, or like a Druid, something you absolutely know won't do anything for the first several turns, hard mulligan for the plot twist. Questing Explorer is also fairly decent as well. And those are the cards you really, really, really want to go for. If you're into a warrior, you can keep the Acidic Swampus as well, just in order to play around the Wrench Caliber. Always make sure you look at combos like Morgue Artificer, Nether Breath. Remember that you can use the Nether Breath on your own Morgue Artificer. If they don't have any minions on the board, but you have Morgue Artificer and Nether Breath in hand, and you need health, don't be afraid to use it on your own minion. It would be really, really helpful. This is something that I've personally learned to do a lot myself. At the beginning, I was like, well, I want to save it to kill something of his, but then I've died for it the very next turn because he had a little bit of burst. So just using it on your own minion sometimes to heal up can be really, really beneficial. And then you get to your late game. Once you finish your quest, you try to draw some of your big stuff for free. 2 Abyssal Summoners is because the meta slowed down. You don't need to run 2. If you don't want, you could take 1 out, but I just think that because of the fact that there are a lot of like slower decks out there, this can get a lot of pressure on the board for you and actually make you somewhat of an aggressor. And then obviously down here, you want to finish them off with Alexstrasza or Malygos for free ideally, but even if you don't, you can get some of your actual damage spells for free and finish them off that way, and it's perfectly fine. This deck is fantastic, would highly recommend it. And I threw in a Transfer Student just because it's a really, really good 2-drop. But if you want to put in a second Questing Explorer, that's also good. So the next deck is Bomb Burst Warrior. There is an Rage Warrior, and Rage Warrior is very similar and I think can also be very good. But I think that this one is slightly better because of the bombs that you put into the opponent's deck, allowing you to do even more damage. The Enrage gets you lackeys with their extra weapon, but I really do like this play, especially considering it gives you another late game power play with Blastmaster Boom. The bombs being in their deck allows you to do some extra damage. The weapon as a whole is slightly stronger, and with the extra durability, it'll get you overall 3 more damage just from attacks than the Livewire Lance, which is pretty good. And the burst potential is there, which is the same as in Rage Warrior, where you have the Inner Rage, Rampage, where is it? Bloodsworn Mercenary, Galakrond Elite, and Grommash. All those cards, somehow you mix them together, you do a ton of burst damage, it's crazy, and it helps you close out games versus decks like Priest. Control Bomb Warrior isn't going to be as good anymore because since Priest doesn't draw that many cards, you can't go for a slower strategy that relies on bombs. But because Quest Warlock is going to see more play in the meta, because Highlander Hunter will still see play in the meta, and because you need just a little bit more burst in general, I think that this will do better than both the typical Bomb Warrior and the Enrage Warrior. It kind of combines the 2 good things of both decks that would excel in this meta and puts them together into a really, really good looking deck. So I would say that this one is another really good deck to try out. It's not too terribly expensive, and if you don't have the Deathwing, I think you can run like a Brawl or something instead, and you could easily replace that. Well, not easily, it would still take a hit, but you can if you want. Overall, how this deck works is you just slow ride with the Corsair Cash and some extra draw and resource generation. Slowly chip away at their health by hitting them with your weapon and some of your minions on the board. Getting a big power play with Blastmaster Boom or some Blood Boil Brutes. And then eventually, and also Deathwing. And then eventually bursting them with Grommash, Galakrond Elites, and then maybe Bombs too, depending on if they're a very heavy card drawing class. Next is the return of Highlander Hunter. I think that Highlander Hunter is a good matchup into Druid and Priest, which are decks that I think are seeing a lot more play. It does decently well into Warrior. Even though they're bomb, the consistency of them getting the bombs in the deck, especially considering their only ways are one of 2 weapons, isn't enough to stop you a lot of the time, and you have Acidic Swampoo's and Zephyrus in case you need to get the in case you need to get some weapon removal. So it does decent into Warrior, it does well into Priest, it does well into Druid, it can rush Warlock down, and those are the 4 classes that I think are going to see the most play. That being said, if you do play against an aggro deck, since you don't run the secret package, you will struggle quite a bit. You have no heal. You're quite vulnerable to them being aggressive towards you. It then becomes a fight for the board, whoever has better tempo, and then hopefully finishing them off. But if there's something like a Murloc Paladin that's designed to go really fast, really wide, you can't really beat them. It's just something that you can't really do. Obviously, if you get the nuts and you get like a Zephyrus really early, and you're able to use the Murloc or the Crab to kill one of their Murlocs and make a 3-4 right from the start of the game, sure, you can win that way. It's not impossible, but if aggro rises in the meta again, or tempo Demon Hunter rises in the meta again, and has more minion-based tempo-type gameplays, you might struggle with this deck a little bit, but since the 4 classes in the game that I think will see the most play all don't do very well into Highlander Hunter, I do think that this has some pretty decent potential. It also does well into Mage, which was just recently nerfed, and is still seeing a decent amount of play. So I could see this deck doing very, very well, although it is a bit of a wild card because it is very dependent on where the meta ends up going at the end of all this. That being said, still a very tempo-heavy deck, fairly simple to play. It'll pretty much always be at least decent, but right now I think it has the potential to be one of the best decks in the game. So yeah, moving on to the next one. So next is obviously Priest. Galakrond Priest and Cube Priest are both extremely good decks. Cube Priest being the version that runs the Psychic Split with the Escape Mana Saber and the 2-mana Rush Dormant minion. For those of you who don't know, it is right here, the Imprisoned Vile Fiend. I think that Galakrond Priest is a little bit better, only because it has some ridiculous late game value that can't really be matched by any deck, even Mage a lot of the time if you can get enough invokes off with this deck and some good combos with Renew. But the Cube version is also very good, and there will be a link to that one underneath the Priest. I'm not going to showcase the deck, but just know that the first one is Galakrond Priest, and the second one is Cube Priest. I'll probably label it differently for you guys. But yeah, Priest was untouched in the nerfs. It was already a very powerful deck. And with the meta slowing down a little bit, you have even more time to get all of your value from all of these cards, and it can just be, it's going to be pretty nuts. Quest Warlock beats it because it's more of an OTK, which is pretty interesting to me, and I think that matchup will be difficult, but a lot of the other ones you'll eventually outvalue if it gets to really late game, and you have enough healing to where, unless it's an OTK, you should be relatively safe. So I think this deck is very strong. Personally, I don't play it very much because I don't like Priest, but it is a very strong deck and deserves some recognition. Next, obviously, is Spell Druid. Spell Druid, again, wasn't touched. The Fungal Fortunes nerf was, as I put it, basically nothing. I really don't think it affects much of their gameplay at all. They still get to play Breath of Dreams, Fungal Fortunes, and Overgrowth on turns 2, 3, 4. It's just that you now have to play Fungal Fortunes on turn 3 instead of choosing between that and Breath of Dreams. So it can be a little bit weird and clunky, but still curves out very, very nicely as a 2, 3, 4 play. And then you have the same late game, mid game power with the Exotic Mount Seller into Massive Board, Emerald Explorer, and discover some dragons that'll carry you late game, and Ysera that'll get you some dragons that'll carry you late game. It's still the exact same deck, was basically not touched, does pretty well into a meta that doesn't instantly rush it down, and if they don't have a response the turn after you overflow and get a ton of dragons, you probably just win. There's not really much you can do about it, to be honest, as another person. Unless you have Zephyrus or like the perfect removal on curve. And even then, Spell Druid has multiple different ways of coming back into the game with like a Glowfly Swarm, Soul of the Forest, their second Exotic Mount Seller, whatever dragons they get from the Emerald Explorer, and they usually just pick the biggest one that they can get. And so yeah, it's still a very, very strong deck. I would highly recommend playing it. It's fairly cheap. I mean, in terms of recommendation of playing it, it's kind of a coin flip because you really need that ramp and you need to get the Exotic Mount Seller. But since the meta slowed down a little bit, you have a little bit more leeway and you can be a little bit slower without getting immediately killed, which is very nice. I don't like the coin flip style where it's like, okay, did I get Overgrowth and Exotic Mount Settler? Yep, cool, I smash him, or no. Well, okay, this is gonna be a rough game. I don't like that style, but it's cheap, it's effective, and it'll get you wins and it'll help you climb, so definitely on the list. Now, these last two are kind of personal favorites of mine that I actually think are really, really strong and people aren't giving enough credit at all. And the first one is Murloc Paladin. Murloc Paladin smashes Spell Druid, it smashes Hunter, it smashes Priest as long as you can get the Cold Light Seer out before they get Breath of the Infinite. You just run them down. Worst case scenario, if you're going second, you Murloc Tidecaller, coin Cold Light Seer just so you have one powerful minion that's hard to kill. Best case scenario, they don't have Breath of the Infinite on turn 3, or they don't coin it out turn 2, rather, and then you just play Cold Light Seer and you tempo out and you smash them. You beat pretty much every single deck in the game if you curve out well. You also have really good draw engines near the end of the game with the Pride, Octosari, some card generation with the Anglite Rods. You actually don't even run out of resources too quickly, although you definitely do. That is a weakness of the deck. And you just kind of smash people. Like, I'm looking at all of the win rates of decks, I think that it does struggle against maybe Mage, because they have a lot of freeze and stall and other ways of dealing with your board, and you can't really do direct damage other than minions. And the same thing kind of goes for Warlock if they have Dark Skies on turn 3, but if Priest doesn't have Breath of the Infinite and Warlock doesn't have Dark Skies on curve, you just run away with the game a lot of the time, and it's not really even close at that point. So overall, highly recommend this deck. I'm personally 11-3 with it over the past 2 days, so before the nerf and after the nerf, it's been extremely successful. And yeah, I think with the way the meta's going, with more of those slower decks, you can really take advantage of it with a very, very fast deck like Murloc Paladin. It's cheap, it's simple, I'd highly recommend it. And just remember, hard mulligan for these 1-drops and sometimes 2-drops. And if you're into Priest or Warlock, you can keep Never Surrender or Cold Light Seer for sure. In fact, you can usually keep Cold Light Seer in general, but if you're into Priest or Warlock, Never Surrender is also a fairly decent card to keep as well, just in case they play some of that removal. Okay, hear me out. The last one may be Totem Shaman, and you may be like, what the heck is this guy talking about? Totem Shaman is on this list. I went 6-0 with this deck on stream today. A lot of you were there if you're watching this right now. Honestly, I think this deck is incredible. First of all, lower skill level people, if you're using this deck to climb anywhere up until like Diamond 5, people won't prioritize killing the totems all the time. If you let a totem live one time and you get a Splitting Axe or Totemic Reflection, you can just run away with the game. Not only that, but similar to Murloc Paladin, if they don't have the removal on curve, and you're able to just play Totemic Reflection or Splitting Axe, you run away with the game. Even if it's not like a conscious choice where they're like, I don't have to kill that totem. Maybe they're higher skill level players and they're like, I should kill that totem just in case. Sometimes they just can't do it, and if they just can't do it, you run away with the game. You have great closeout potential with Bloodlust and Vicina. Your early game is actually pretty consistent with a lot of 1-drops and a lot of 3-drops. You don't have a lot of 2-drops, but that's because you want to hero power a lot of the time. And deck is pretty strong, man. It has great closeout potential, like I said, and it can snowball games so hard. I think it's a little less consistent than Murloc Paladin. I do think that Murloc Paladin is a bit better, but Totem Shaman is definitely a powerful deck that actually has some burst damage from hand with Lightning Bolt and Lava Burst, which does give it a slight edge over Murloc Paladin into matchups like Mage, which like freeze, or Warlock, which can freeze and kill your board very easily, but you still can do a lot of damage too. So yeah, deck is very solid. Try it out. It's not very expensive. If you don't have Vicina, take it out, put in Bloodlust. Low risk, high reward, especially at lower ranks. This deck will absolutely stomp. And even at higher ranks, I was playing against all legend opponents because my MMR has been finally fixed after playing some meme decks, and won 6-0. I went 6-0. So I would say that it's a solid deck. Just know that you want a hard mulligan, usually for 1-drops, and you want to keep Totemic Might, not Totemic Surge, because it's more important to get your totems the health so that they live. And if you can do this turn 2 along with a totem, and then Totemic Reflection to keep it alive because they can't kill a 4 health minion on turn 2, you just run away with the game. You then have 2 pretty strong totems, and then you can trade in with it, and if they're healing totems, you're chilling. If they're lackey totems, you get a ton of lackeys that way, which is crazy strong, and yeah, it works really, really well. I'd recommend it. If you don't want to play, I understand. If you want to play a different aggro deck, I would say Murloc Paladin is the next best choice for you, but I would say at least give this deck a chance. Doesn't cost that much, and I think it's very, very strong. So thank you all for watching. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to try to answer them. If you guys like the content, feel free to subscribe, comment, and like. All those things help me a lot, and since 75% of you aren't subscribed anyway, and you're probably watching this video and a lot of my other videos, it would help me a lot if you did subscribe. Just boost my algorithm a little bit, and I would appreciate it a lot. And yeah, all these decks are really strong. They're what I think will be strong, given what I predict the meta will turn into, but isn't necessarily set in stone, and things are set to change because the new meta is just shaping up with the nerfs, so things could change. These are just the best decks for probably about the first week. So I hope you guys enjoyed. See you in the next one.